All right, everybody, good evening and welcome back and Happy New Year. Wow, hard to believe. 2015 already. I'm here live with you on America Now. Thanks so much for joining me. I want to begin the new year in a positive, empowering way. And the topics for tonight's show hopefully reflect that. In hour one, the phone lines are going to be wide open. And I encourage you to join me in talking about what's ahead for all of us in 2015. We're going to be talking healthcare, Obamacare, jobs, inflation. Whatever's on your mind, give me a call. And how can we all work together to solve individual and this nation's problems? Then in hour two, I'm going to be talking with the world's #1 coach of champions, Jim Fannin, about how to make and keep those New Year's resolutions. Finally, in hour three, internationally renowned earth lawyer Polly Higgins will be daring you to stand up and be great to help co-create a better world for all of us. I hope you stay for the entire show, but if you do miss any part, you can listen in anytime on my website, radioamericanow.com, under archives. Well, as I just mentioned, the topic this first hour is what's ahead in 2015. Joining me to begin the discussion is friend and former statewide prosecutor and Deputy Attorney General of New Jersey, John J. Higgins. During his career, John researched and wrote policy papers for governmental committees, drafted legislation, and revised statutes. He also prosecuted some of the highest-profile cases, including one of the nation's most prolific serial killers, Charles Cullen. Today, John's the author of the book series, The Archangel Jeremiel, and The War to Conquer Heaven. If you'd like more information about John, visit his website, john-j-higgins.com. John and I invite you now. Please call us during this hour. Share your thoughts. What do you think's ahead in 2015, and how do we solve this nation's problems? The number, 800-259-5791. Again, that's 800-259-5791. John, welcome back. What's ahead in 2015 for all of us, and where do you want to begin?
Well, I hope it's going to be a great year, and I wish everybody a Happy New Year, and hopefully it'll be prosperous and healthy. Speaking of health, I think we wanted to start about health care, right?
Yep. Let's tackle Obamacare. It's the biggie.
Well, I was just, I'm really not an expert in Obamacare, but I'm usually pretty good at reading whatever's been written, and when I see it, I think that, Obamacare is a blessing in many ways because providing health care across the country has been an important topic for the last 40 or 50 years. There's a lot of people who weren't covered, and it's not like society hasn't had to pay for them. There was always free care, or there's a Hill-Burton Act where they have to treat you in a hospital and whatever. So it hasn't been a free ride before that anyway. So by getting everybody covered under health care, hopefully that will reduce some of the costs of the government over time. When I've looked at the plans, though, that they have, they seem to be very tricky for people who are signing up. You almost need a lawyer to interpret what the provisions are. When I look through a lot of them, there's an offset between what you pay per month and then what is covered. And in that offset, there's even a further distinction in terms of what your co-pays may be and your deductibles. And some of the plans on the cheaper side really have $1,500 or $2,500 deductibles that you have to pay before you get any kind of reimbursement for the copay for a doctor or hospital or whatever. So that could be extremely expensive for somebody if they got into a position that they had a health problem, and they have to come up with that money before they really get any real benefit from the insurance policy.
Yeah, and I think, too, that, we've got a lot of things that are going to be happening this year in 2015, too, with Obamacare, because after years of delay, businesses now are going to really be affected. Those with over 100 employees are going to be forced now to offer insurance for the first time this year. And I know a lot of those business groups have lobbied very hard against this controversial rule because they believe it's going to be forcing layoffs and less hours for workers. What's your opinion there, John?
Well, Well, historically, companies offered health benefits. In my day growing up, actually having health coverage really wasn't a question when you had a job. That was something that was automatically covered. And, I worked in government for 20-some-odd years, 25, 26 years. So I was in a different system than for private industry. But when I worked in private industry, after you worked for a company for a certain number of months, you were automatically covered in health care. I think the big problem in healthcare has really become the cost of healthcare, and that is allowed insurance companies to charge tremendous amounts of money for coverage, and I think that's what's really harming a big portion of the economy. If it was affordable, companies would continue to do what they were doing. I don't know if you're familiar, but in California, before all of this started, maybe 10 years ago, Blue Cross Blue Shield, they were hiking their rates astronomically, and finally somebody said, no, we're not going to do that. And the next thing, they started investigating them. The insurance rate dropped far lower than what it had been in the existing, rate, even before they were talking about the additional costs. So sometimes I think that what really needs to happen at some point is somebody needs to investigate the insurance companies and find out where all this money is going.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think most of us can probably guess where a lot of this money is going, but that's just speculation at this point and a lot of hearsay. But I think, too, John, this would be not just one group anymore, like you talked about Blue Cross, Blue Shield, which is Anthem Blue Cross now, but we've got Kaiser, we've got all of them now. They're all upping their rates. And for people who are now mandated, we've got the individual mandates coming in as well, where if you don't get the insurance, this year, okay, you're going to have to pay $95 or 1% of your income. Well, that could be hefty depending on your income, or not that much, but starting the years after, it can really add up and hurt a lot of people. And if you're being forced to either pay to the IRS or to these insurance companies, we the people are feeling like we're caught in the middle here, and we don't have anywhere to turn. It's a lose-lose in some ways, even though we want coverage. How do we solve this?
Well, I think part of the other problem is it's not only the $95, is that many of the policies today by income level are subsidized by the government. So you're not, the individual isn't paying the full price of the coverage. The government is kicking in the money on the other side. But like I say, it's not like, I haven't heard any politician talk about going in and making sure that these insurance companies are regulated to the point that we know that they're not making excessive profits or, hiking rates. As far as I know, and I don't know that that's changed, but when I was in law school, we were taught that the insurance companies were the only business that was not subject to the Sherman Antitrust Act, which means that there doesn't really have to be competition among them. And that becomes very problematic, particularly in a free market. Right?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, this way, that no one, if you have no control on what the costs are, and they keep telling you, what it should be, then you have really no defense when they keep hiking the rates. And then on the other side, half the time, they also, depending on the policies, they control what a doctor can or cannot do when they recommend to have something done. The HMOs were like that for many years, and if you're in any other kind of difficulty, I can only speak for New Jersey with that, but in the workman's comp system, the nurse or the cleric in the insurance company can...
Hang on, John. We're heading to a break here really quick. All right, we will return on America Now with more about Obamacare. All right, well, I am back from Venus and now on Earth again, and I'm talking about what's ahead in 2015 with John Higgins. We're talking about Obamacare, and if you'd like to call in and voice your opinion about all of this, it's 800-259-5791. And John, you're mentioning about the doctors and stuff, and I think, if I remember right, I think primary care doctors are going to be facing quite a pay cut because of Obamacare starting in 2015, especially if they treat Medicaid patients. They're going to not get those payments from the federal government, then it's going to be tougher, especially then for millions of low-income people to find care, because those doctors are not going to they're not going to be wanting to treat the lower income Medicaid patients. So
Absolutely.
I think this is going to be, and also Medicare doctors, if I remember right, are going to be fined if they're not using e-records now. So,
I don't know about the e-records, but I do know that in New Jersey, the Medicaid plan that they have for people that are on welfare or whatever basically becomes meaningless because no doctors take it. So they have a card, but they weren't able to find a doctor to find treatment. And even if they found a doctor, I know when I did the research back in the 80s on children's care and whatever with the immunizations, it cost the doctor more for the serum than what he got reimbursed, much less his time. So, those are things that I think need to be examined as well at some point.
Yeah, you mentioned children's care. I think CHIP funding set to expire this year, too, CHIP was what, a 27-year program that helped millions of kids gain insurance, especially the low incomes. Children again. And I think there's something like 8 million children. I looked it up quickly today. And both sides, both Republicans and Democrats, have always supported this program. But now the members of Congress have failed to take steps to fund the program. And if that goes away, that's really going to hurt a lot of people out there.
Well, and particularly when you deal with children, is if you don't take care of them at certain stages and they become weaker or whatever, the costs become much greater as they grow older. It's really an investment into the future, and I think that in America we need to invest in ourselves rather than send money all over overseas. We need to be pumping some of that money back in for our own population.
Yeah, we're the big, we talk about repairing the infrastructure, but we the people are the big infrastructure, the biggest ones there. And we seem to be getting pushed around all over the place all the time. And who's really taking care of us? And I agree with you totally there, John. We really need to bring some of that money home. Where would you suggest some of that money come from?
Well, we certainly spend a lot of money in foreign aid. We're basically the police force of the world. Canada has a wonderful healthcare, system, and England, they do fairly well and whatever, but they're not sending troops all over the world like we do, nor are they consistently providing aid to all of these countries. I don't know if you remember that old movie, The Mouse That Roared. They made a comedy out of a little country declaring war on the United States because, of course, they would get a tremendous amount of money back if they capitulated. And, I think we were even sending money over to Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. I understand that, we should be helpful to the rest of the world, but at some point we need to start cutting back and taking care of our own systems first.
Yeah, I think so, too, as well. It's kind of hard, though, because, on one hand, if we pull back that money, does it leave us more vulnerable in some ways? I don't know.
Well, then it reminds me that we're bribing the bully.
Well, okay.
Right? I want your lunch money. Well, you can cause a problem, so I'll give you my money and I won't eat lunch. And, I had somebody ask me today, they were going through their paycheck and all this money was going off into taxes. And it's like, what do I get back for these taxes? And in New Jersey, we get less money back than what we pump into the feds. And that's not even the problem as much as, like I say, all this money is going into all of these other countries, or, we're building military equipment that the military itself doesn't want. At some point, somebody has to be rational about this and start saying, if you hear all the time the politicians say we're broke, right? We have no money. But 3 days later, a wind blows ill in Sri Lanka, and we're sending over $3 billion in aid.
Yep. Yeah.
So where did that money come from? You got to be consistent in what you're going to do. You're telling all us to tighten our belts and, share and sacrifice and all of that. But, the politicians it's like the foreign aid is like a whole area that they really don't examine at all. I don't even know where you look for it sometimes in the budget. Because the money comes out of nowhere whenever a crisis occurs.
Yeah, it certainly does. Well, it comes out of where a lot of the money comes out of these days, out of thin air. They just kind of, hey, let's just print some more.
Yeah. And that's becoming a problem. I mean, you know, I know you wanted to talk about minimum wage as well. When I was a kid, I think minimum wage was $1.67.
Whoa!
Right? I mean, when I was in the 60s into the 70s, I mean, you know, my first job that I had when I came out of college, I was making like $3.30 an hour or something, and I was making a lot more money than any one of my friends. And people in those days could have lived off, a family could live off one person's salary. None of that's true any longer.
Oh, yeah. And what are they talking right now? At the federal level, they want to raise it to, what, $10.50 an hour. But now with all this, 20 states just raised the minimum wage. I know your state did, my state did. And I think the highest is going to be Washington now with $9.47 or something like that. But will raising this minimum wage in the U.S. actually help or hurt our economy right now?
Well, I think that always remains to be seen because you don't know what the whole effect is going to be. But, you know, my problem with the minimum wage all the time, I mean, in New Jersey, I think we're like $8.38 or whatever. And I challenge anybody to live in like central New Jersey or North Jersey, maybe in South Jersey in a couple of pockets on that kind of money. It's just not enough. And beyond the minimum wage, there's not the higher salaries that come along with that. Minimum wages should be, you know, more for high school kids and that kind of thing. And then we should have real salaries for other people. And I don't know about the people around you, but you know, anybody I worked with in government, I mean, that used to be a general middle class kind of, you know, lifestyle or whatever. And you know, the costs, they haven't gotten raises in years, no raise of any significance. And greater costs, you know, they pay now for health care that they didn't pay for before.
Yeah, and everything's going up, but the raises, you know, we're not getting, what I'm hearing you say, John, is true. We're not getting the raises, but everything else is going up. All right, let's talk about this on the other side of the break here. When America Now continues, stay with us. All right, everybody, welcome back. You are listening to America Now, and I'm talking with John Higgins. We're talking about inflation right now and the new minimum wage. Have an opinion? Come on, call in. 800-259-5791. Again, that's 800-259-5791. And John, I don't know about you, but, you know, you and I have talked about this. Every time you go to the store, you know, the price has gone up week by week by week. You know, we don't get more money as far as raises go or our wages, but the inflation that they keep telling us isn't there is definitely there. And the excuse before for the food going up was, well, you know, because of the gas prices going so sky high, it costs way more to transport it. But you know, here in Colorado, we went under $2 a gallon a little while back, and the food prices are still going up. So I don't know what the excuse is now, but inflation's real.
Oh, definitely. I mean, what the government says that the rate of inflation is compared to what the real rate of inflation is are really, you know, very skewed. And I've told you this story before. My accountant a number of years ago told me about there's some kind of treasury bill that was going to adjust for inflation. And I kind of laughed at him, and I said, well, who decides what the inflation rate is, Donald? And he goes, well, the government. I said, do you really think the government is ever going to accurately reflect what the inflation rate is so they're going to pay you more money and interest? And I think that's part of it. And the other part of it is if they really gave what the full amounts were, they would have to adjust Social Security and a lot of these other programs to a more realistic rate. And I know for the stuff I buy, I mean, I don't know, I get protein powder, some, you know, for lifting weights or whatever, and, you know, it'd be $30 one week. I go in there the next week, it's $35.
Whoa.
So that certainly isn't a 1%.
No, not my math.
Right. And if you like potato chips, I don't know what happened to that whole industry, but the bag stayed the same, but you got to shake the bag to be sure there's something in it. or the ice cream containers particularly. I remember, 8-10 years ago when you got a half gallon of ice cream, it was a half gallon of ice cream. Now it's a quart and a half.
The new half gallon. Don't you know they've revised it?
Exactly. So even if they don't raise the price, they reduce the amount of product that you get. And gasoline has dropped for the moment, but I'm waiting again for some ill wind to blow in Saudi Arabia. That all of a sudden they're going to have to hike all of that because they can't survive on the idea that they're not making these landfall profits.
Yeah, and it's all about making the profits, and they do have to. But at the same time, let's go back to this thing though with the minimum wage for a second here, John. Do you think that the minimum wage then should be indexed to inflation?
Well, that's what we've kind of done in New Jersey. Now, whether or not that's going to work, I don't know, because until you know exactly what the scale is that they're using and how it reflects in real life. But yeah, I think that at some point we're going to have to do something along those lines. And like I say, but it's not only the minimum wage. If the minimum wage increased and let's say the middle level managers never get a raise, well, that's not solving anything either. And I always think that it's like a race between minimum wage or whatever and inflation. One moves up a little bit, you move the other one up. But it's like a never-ending cycle. So someplace along the line, again, I think that we need, some kind of leadership in the country that really starts looking at what's causing all of this. I mean, because it's happening all over the country. And I can't believe that there is not some way that we can get a handle on what the root causes are.
I'm not sure that the, quote, leaders that we currently have want us to know what the, quote, root causes are. Because I have a feeling they're very deeply involved in a lot of this.
Oh, I do too. I do too.
Yeah. And a lot of people too right now, John, say that with the rate hike for the minimum wage, that the one industry that's really going to be impacted is fast food. Will it cause that much unemployment for the low-wage workers?
Well,
do you know?
I don't know. Did you ever work in a fast food place?
No, I have not.
Well, I did. I will tell you, in all the places I've ever worked in, I've worked in a lot of places, it was the hardest job of all. You never really got to sit down. It was really a difficult job. And I think fast food is still always going to remain fast food because basically the American lifestyle that we're always on the run. But I don't know. I think that they have their own problems that are even greater than the minimum wage, in terms of what the health, considerations may be or whatever. But, the thing is that somehow all of that always gets absorbed. I don't think that is going to put a company out of business.
Yeah, that's probably true. It wouldn't, and what's really sad now, too, is so many people are being forced into the service industry and even the fast food industry. It used to be, we'd think about it as teenagers. It was a great job to get in high school or, something like that,
right.
But now so many people are without jobs. You go into any McDonald's or Burger King or any of those places, or especially the Walmarts, because they're not paying any better than Mickey D's or any of these others. Most of the people in there should have been retired. Yes,
but again, Social Security hasn't kept up with what the costs of living are, and that is a problem on one end. On the other end, I'm anecdotally from the reports that I've read in the news or whatever, is that a lot of Walmart employees are on food stamps because of the little bit of amount of money they get. So in some ways, we're doing corporate welfare in like a roundabout way, so that their workers can survive. Yeah. And that's why I say it's just fundamentally unfair. And I like what there's a couple of senators who are speaking about that the deal in America has gotten skewed, and it's no longer a fair deal for most of the population. And many people I talk to are all complaining about the same kind of problem. They all see that their worth is lessening and their costs are increasing.
Yeah, we're being squeezed out. The middle class is dying. Totally. I mean,
and
it's
the
true.
foolish part of that is that without a middle class, the economy collapses.
Exactly. So is this something that... All right, a lot of people, if you want to go this, conspiracy route, would say, yeah, this is being forced upon us because they want this to happen. They are. And then, or is this just a consequence of leaders who have not been leaders in so very long, decades worth, that now we're seeing the full effects of this train wreck?
Well, and I think what's happened in the American public, and I'm hoping that'll start changing in 2015, is that at the end of the day, each individual person really does have the power, and that power is in the vote. And if people get out and they vote, and they start, speaking out, and they start talking with one another in terms of what is really going on, not what we're being told, and then you have a politician who's going along with all of these kind of bills and whatever, then you vote them out of office. And it might take a concerted effort, but I think that there's many more of us than there are of them.
Yeah, and that's where we need to group back together. That's empowerment. That's where we need to unite. We are so polarized, John, you and I have talked about this before. We are so separated right now, and because most people are so worried about their own bottom line, how to keep the roof over their head, how to feed the kids, how to even keep the job, even if it is just at McDonald's or whatever. No offense, McDonald's. But, it's so hard that people can't communicate with one another at this point. All right, America Now returns after the break. Stay with us. All right, everybody, welcome back. You're listening to America Now. John Higgins is joining me, and we've been talking about everything from Obamacare to inflation and the new minimum wages. But now it's your turn. Come on. Join us. 800-259-5791. And John, right before the break, we were starting to talk about empowerment, how we need to unite. And social media is a huge way we can all gather together. Even if we can't physically come together, we certainly can use social media. And you and I are proposing, and we'll be doing this, about putting a Facebook page out there where people can unite. We can talk about solutions, both individually, but especially how to solve these kind of bigger problems that we are all, as Americans, facing today. And that's going to be huge. And we really encourage everybody. We're going to let you know when it's up. But we encourage everybody, please join us out there. Come on, we've got to unite. We can't stay divided, because divided, truly, we will fall. And this country will fall. And none of us wants that. I know that. So, John, your turn.
Well, I often think, in terms of when, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, they believed that the American public would never unite to fight a war against them. And I remember on 9/11, after we were attacked by those planes, how everyone in the country, even when you drove around on the roads, everybody was courteous, nicer to one another. And I think that if we look at what's going on in our society right now, is almost like, I don't want to call it an enemy because that makes it so negative, but as a challenge or as a threat to us, that we really need to kind of pull ourselves together and start addressing this as a nation, not be divided among one another. You have the private sector workers against the public workers, and this group against that group. That's really not the way this society should work. The idea was that we'd all be one community trying to help one another, and I believe that's also part of being a Christian nation, is that we are supposed to help one another. And if we get out of this idea that, it's like dog eat dog, and whoever becomes the guy with the most toys wins, I don't think that's what it's all about. And I know that Americans have a much higher, moral fiber, and that they are kind, and that we can pull together. And I think when we start doing that, we start to need to hold the politicians accountable. They should be trusted servants, not dictators. And somehow that has gotten lost. We have like a royalty class that are, lifetime politicians. That's not what this country was ever meant to be. George Washington, who, could have, in a blink of an eye, proclaimed himself king, right?
Right.
After 2 terms, he left. And that should be the example of what public servants do in our country, from the local level all the way up to the presidency.
Yeah, and you've hit the nail on the head there. Servant comes from the word service. What is service? Service is not putting yourself first, basically. It's looking at the greater good for everybody. You are there to serve others. And that's exactly what our elected officials were supposed to be doing. And they did that in the beginning. Our founding fathers knew exactly what they were doing, serving. Hey, don't make us career politicians. That, we just got away from all that kind of stuff. We don't want the royalty. We don't want kings. We want people who will donate their time in service to our fellow citizens and this country. And that's what we really need to get again in this country. People stepping up from the average ranks saying, hey, I'm willing to do this. And I'm willing to put in this much time. And how about, you and I have talked about this, term limits and no pensions. You've mentioned that. Talk a little about that.
Well, the whole idea that you get elected to Congress or the U.S. Senate, and then you're entitled to a pension, I mean, it just is so against what the founding fathers were about. They were gentlemen farmers that would come and serve their time, and then they would go back to their normal life. And this whole idea now that you can go in there and get paid for life by getting elected, well, of course people are going to do that, and they're going to do anything and everything to get into that office, rather than being, honest about what their positions really are, and then fulfilling what they get elected to do. That's all lost, because the whole goal now is just to get elected, and then they serve term after term after term, and either they create laws that become absolutely ridiculous because they don't want to address the real issues, or they do nothing. And that needs to stop. The world is in flux. Our society is in flux. We need people committed for the greater good. And I think that's quite possible. When I first went into government, I went into government under a governor that everybody in the governor's office really, if you called them, they thanked you for calling them back. It wasn't, well, this is the governor's office, Mm-hmm. I mean, and that's the way it should all be.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's become a profession. Politicians have now decided this is actually a profession like any other profession. And in that profession, they decide to hang on to the highest levels they can attain and get the most out of it. And then, beyond that, they can even pass it down to other family members or spouses. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that happen over and over and over again at all levels of government now.
Yes, we fought a war not to have a royal class.
Yeah.
Right? These guys in the American Revolution risked everything they had to get rid of a royal class. And now we have a royal class under a different name. Yeah. And probably more powerful than what the royalty was at the time of the American Revolution.
Yeah, they certainly have a lot more power at their fingertips, too. At this point, a little scary.
Yes, absolutely.
So again, let's join together. We can do it social media. You can talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends. It ripples out. That's how we move this country. It's we the people that are going to make the changes. And I sit out here and I get frustrated sometimes because I see so many people so hopeless, John. Well, there's nothing we can do. My vote doesn't count. Well, maybe, but don't give up. Why give up?
But this is exactly what this political class wants you to believe.
Yes.
That you really have no power. If they don't have your vote, they don't have you. So
right.
The thing is to combine those votes and find candidates that are willing to, I don't know whether to make them take pledges. We can discuss that on the Facebook page. I don't know how that all fleshes itself out, but there's certain things that I think really need to be incorporated because people, on their own, they will not do it. There needs to be term limits. The money needs to be removed from politics. You can't have all these moneyed people having a much greater say in what happens in the country because they provide, a donation to, a PAC or to a candidate or, whatever it is that helps them get elected. And then they have a voice that's 1,000 times or 10,000, times louder than your voice. And they're only doing it for their own self-interest. They're not doing it for the common good.
Yeah.
They want something for that money.
Mm-hmm.
And I come from a world where, as a prosecutor, we could have no outside interests. We could not, if we went to a conference or whatever, we couldn't eat anything bigger than a bagel. Otherwise, it had to be paid for. And that really needs to be the same kind of moral code or ethical code that needs to be put upon the politicians.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be wined and dined and flown around the world, because that means they owe somebody. They should not owe anybody but the American people.
Right. We need to remind them of the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yes, absolutely.
The Pledge of Allegiance to the United States of America. And that means all of us. You know, we ought to make them repeat it when they get in. I know they do, but I don't think they understand that anymore.
Well, they take an oath of office, but that's only as a photo op.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know, they seem to lose the message.
Yeah.
And you know, to me, the whole thing is now, we have a governor who's more interested in the higher office than he is in the office he's in. Yeah. And that shouldn't be happening either. When you're in, you should serve your term. If you're not going to serve your term, you should be banned from serving again.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
To me, that's not a big deal. That you make a commitment. If you don't make the commitment, you shouldn't be there.
All right, John. Well, we're running out of time here. And again, everybody, watch for the Facebook page. We'll announce it on air probably next week, hopefully.
Yes.
Hopefully. And we'll be working on it. So join us out there, please. This is for the greater good of all of us. All right, America Now will continue after the top of the hour.